Thanks. I appreciate your accommodating me this afternoon. I'm tuning in from the Naval Academy. You're actually having our first in-person flag conference in a couple of years due to COVID. So thank you. And I wish I could be there in person today, but it just didn't work out logistically. I know the Secretary of the Navy just just finished speaking at a fairly high level, I believe, although I didn't hear all his remarks. What I thought I'd do is really focus on this decade and the transition into the 2030s, and the Navy that we're on glide slope to field in this decade, and then probably hit on some important transition points later on in the decade as well. Up front, my focus has always been to try and field the most lethal, capable, ready force that we can, given the top line that we receive from the President and the U.S. Congress. And my priority since I entered this job in August of 2019 have been the Seaborne Deterrent, so the Columbia-class submarine, which we have no margin on, and we need to field on time, put that boat in the water in 2028 and on mission in 2031. My second priority has always been about readiness, and that's delivering ready forces today that are fully manned, or manned as best we can, have full magazines with ships that are maintained and ready to go. The next priority after that has always been modernization, and then lastly, capacity. And I know the Secretary talked about capacity and capability yielding lethality, and I'm happy to talk about that as well in my view. If I think out a few years towards the end of the FIDP and what we're delivering as a force, I like to talk in at least three dimensions initially, talk about where we are under the sea, on the sea, and in the air. And I think it's important to think about the fleet in that manner because that's how we're going to fight. And so as I think about the undersea in mid-decade, we will have finished delivering Virginia-class Block 4s and be at the cusp of delivering Virginia Block 5s, both with a more capable torpedo. We are also making investments in underwater unmanned vehicles as well, some that are launched from submarines and some that perhaps operate autonomously. Columbia will be a steady line into through the 2020s and into the 2030s. And then I see a transition likely from Virginia-class submarines into SSNX, probably mid-2030s is a decent aim point right now. I think in this particular budget, we have about 100 million for R&D against SSNX. So we're already looking at what's at requirements for that particular submarine to ensure that we maintain that overmatch that we have right now against key competitors. If I think about the surface, I'm thinking about Flight 3 DDGs. We're just about to commission our first, the Jack Lucas down in Pascagoula here in just a couple of weeks. So Flight 3 DDGs rolling off the assembly line. FFG 62s, as the Secretary talked about a few minutes ago. Upgunning our Zumwalt-class destroyers with hypersonic missiles. Continue to invest in Maritime Strike Tomahawk, continuing to invest in Standard Missile 6. So think about weapons launched from the sea with range and speed. An integration of unmanned more robustly in 3 to 5 years out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. A transition into DDGX in the early 2030s. I think about the air domain. We continue to acquire F-35s. We are upgrading our existing Block 2 F-18 strike fighters, Block 3s with our service life extension program that we're investing in. So what that yields in 2025 and 2026 is half of our air wings being 4th and 5th gen capable. As many of you know, we just finished our first integrated deployment on USS Carl Vinson with F-35s and Super Hornets, and we've got another carrier out of the chute right now with the same configuration. We continue to invest in upgrade in P8s, which are providing great theater ASW capabilities. MV-22 with the vertical lift, and then later on in the decade, as we look at the next generation rotary lift, as well as next generation air dominance platforms that'll enter the fleet. The work that we're doing right now, integrating MQ-25 unmanned into our existing carrier air wings, is absolutely critical, and I consider to be the pathway ahead for us as we integrate next generation air defense, next generation air dominance, both manned and unmanned capabilities into our wings. So MQ-25, we're learning from it. I think it's evolutionary instead of revolutionary. We're learning a lot right now and continue at a steady pace that takes us to IOC in about 2025. We're on pace for that right now. In terms of weapons, continue to invest in LRASM in numbers. With respect to the human weapon system, if I could just step away from the three dimensions for a moment, live virtual construct is a very important investment line for us. And so the advantages that we saw in able to train to fight like a fleet this past summer in large scale exercise 21 were really important. And as I've described to some of you perhaps before, Secretary of the Navy and I, on his first day in the job, went down to Norfolk, and we observed large-scale exercise 21. We went out to an amphibious ship, to a big deck amphib, where they were actually operating off the coast of off the Bay Capes, off of Virginia, North Carolina coast. Yet the geography that was superimposed off the coast of Norway. They were operating with other ships live. They had a carrier strike group out there, I believe at the time it was the Truman. Constructively, we had amphibious ships that were actually in the Fifth Fleet AOR. So over off the coast of Yemen, they were superimposed into that geography and actually involved in the fight. We actually had land-based headquarter elements that were hooked in as well. So we did this with all five of our fleets. We did this with 5 fleets simultaneously. Think about 30,000 sailors, hundreds of ships and airplanes. We had aircraft. We had F-18s that looked like Chinese fighters, as an example, in that exercise. And we continue to refine our LVC capabilities with every deploying strike group and ARG as we take our concept, distributed maritime operations, and continue to mature that in fleet battle problems with every deploying and returning strike group and ARG, and we continue to insert live virtual constructive training in those fleet battle problems so we can learn more, refine, and improve. Ready relevant learning is another investment in the human weapon system that I consider critical. So consider a move from a very rigid brick and mortar schoolhouse type of learning environment, one that's a hybrid with much more virtual, but at the same time with training that we can get to the warfighter at a time when he or she needs it most. So it's optimized. We're not front loading a bunch of 2 or 3 years of schools up front in a sailor's career and expecting they're going to automatically use that when they hit the fleet, because they won't. So it's the right training at the right time in the right way. We have 8 ratings right now that are in the that we've converted to ready relevant learning, and we've got another 8 to 9 in the chute that are progressing very, very well. All 39 ratings have gone through a requirements process, so we know the direction. We know what we need to do with respect to ready relevant learning. Sailor 2025, investments we've made for sailors and their families. I'll give you an example. We've taken 70 different websites and we've collapsed that into an integrated cloud environment with a single exit point to provide spouses, as an example, the ability to actually read and understand their spouses, their active duty spouses' orders for once. the ability to get in there and to put their names on a list for childcare, to put their family on a list for housing. So we're trying to make it a lot easier for sailors to manage their careers in a way that's that's easiest for them, and that's off their phones. We just on the 1st of March, we just started our first detailing marketplace, which is what it sounds. It's a competitive, transparent environment for sailors to begin to compete for positions. And then we're also making big investments in sailor resiliency, particularly in the areas of mental health. In terms of information warfare, we're about to stand up an information warfare task fleet in Pacific Fleet under a 1-star flag officer. We are making investments in maritime space officers as well. We have them right now at U.S. Space Command and within the headquarters in the Pentagon. And we will increase the ramp up of those numbers in over the FIDP. We're also in discussions with U.S. Space Command Commander General Dickinson about formalizing a maritime space component. I would expect within the next couple of months, we'll be in a position to talk more broadly about that. And lastly, on the shore side, I think it's important for us to talk about SIOP. That's our optimization program that we have in place for our dry docks and our public shipyards. So as I take a look at, hopefully, if we get a budget for 22 here soon, that will give us some headlights into the final stages of 23. And then, as you know, we're in the buildup for the 24 Palm. If we can keep that together, that's the glides. I've just described what those budgets will yield if we can hold that all together, or at least I've given you my honest insights into my priorities in those budgets under those pillars of readiness, modernization, and then capacity. My navigation plan, I will put out an update here within another month. The navigation plan was always intended to keep the Navy sighted and honest on those key competencies that we most have to deliver during what we consider to be a critical decade. What the Wall Street Journal described recently in an op-ed and an editorial as a combustible decade. So there are 4 key areas that I'd like to touch on real briefly. How we shoot, maneuver, defend, and resupply. So we have critical work going on under the shoot piece with respect to long-range fires. I described some of that work. Hypersonics is a big part of that work, but that is ongoing. And for each of these elements of the NAV plan, we actually have, in the cases I'm going to describe anyway, the areas I'm going to talk about this afternoon, we actually have classified North Stars or objectives. And those objectives are defined in terms of specific outcomes at a specific time with an accountable 3-star officer that's in charge of delivering to those objectives. So the first one is shoot and long-range fires. Maneuver. That has to do with counter C5 ISRT, and think about blinding the adversary, particularly early in a fight where we want to put our forces in a position of advantage. Defend has everything to do with terminal defense. I am very bullish on directed energy and microwave energy as a means to defend the fleet. So maneuvering the fleet is an important part of it. Making it defendable, defending it is another, so we can actually shoot and deliver long-range fires. And then lastly, resupply in that area, that's the area of contested logistics. Thinking differently about how we keep a distributed fleet forward supplied in the fight. There are 4 enablers in the NAB plan that that provide connective tissue for those 4 big elements that I just described. One of those is unmanned, and I'm happy to get into that a little bit further in Q&A. The second is networks. That's our Project Overmatch and the naval operational architecture that will deliver out of that. We're about to go strike group wide at the end of the year into 23 with a deploying strike group and that effort. Live virtual construct I talked about. And then the last one is AI. And so our investment in AI in every warfare area, but beyond that, business systems, manpower, personnel, we have many efforts going on with respect to AI. They're fundamental to the shoot maneuver, defend, and resupply lines in the NAV plan that I mentioned a moment ago. So with that, I'd like to pause, and I think the Q&A will open the aperture here and be able to get at things a little bit more deeply.
Where is he? Where can he see me? Is he over there? Hello, sir. Good. Jim McAleese. I'm sorry to throw out the first question. You had talked out at USNI, the U.S. West, about a week ago about the 500-ish fleet that you were looking for, about kind of maybe a notional 355, and then perhaps another 150 unmanned beyond that. One of the questions that's been coming up all day is could you kind of unpack that from kind of a fleet quantity perspective in terms of carriers and the working way down into the big deck amphibs and so on and so forth? That would be fantastic.
Sure, I can repeat what I said otherwise. Jim, it's your conference, so I guess you can ask as many questions as you want. But on the 500 Fleet Navy, so that's what I see as a requirement. The time frame I'm looking at is out to 2040. Every study that's been done inside and out inside the Pentagon and outside the Pentagon since 2016 has spoken to a force at least at 355. But when you add in unmanned, which is what we took a more rigorous look at in the force structure assessment that we did in 2020, that was about 150 vessels at that time frame in 2040. I would like to add as an important footnote is that the analysis that I'm quoting, the most recent analysis, was actually led by OSD Cape. And so this is not just Navy telling you our own story. This is somebody else validating the numbers that we came up with. And it's continued to be the number 500 will continue to be looked at this year as we do another force structure assessment to support POM 24. Why is that important? Well, the Secretary of Defense is about to release a new strategy, so with a new force planning construct. And so that's vitally important in terms of shaping our view on not only how we're going to set the globe on a day-to-day basis with a forward deployed Navy in order to support his view of integrated deterrence and campaigning, but also the means by which we think we need the numbers by which we think we need in a fight. And I should mention, we have a pretty good understanding of how we would come at the adversary. We have a decent understanding of how the adversary would come at us. So our coming at him in a distributed manner, not only across the vast Pacific, but across multiple domains simultaneously, that's the theory of the fight in terms of how we get after it. In terms of the numbers, in terms of carriers, at least 12. And so I go back to terminal defense. That's an important part of this. Maneuverability is an important part of this. Carriers remain the most survivable airfields in the world. So if you take a look at Reagan Airport today, it's going to be in the same place tomorrow afternoon at this time. Meanwhile, an aircraft carrier could be off the coast of Newfoundland. It could be off of Miami. If it could go west, it'd be west of the Mississippi. And so that's a movable, survivable platform. And again, I talked about the weapons that we're investing in. I talked about the MQ-25. It gives us range. It releases fighters also from that refueling role. Nine large deck amphibs, about 18 or 19 traditional amphibs to support that. Another 30 when we begin to talk about smaller amphibs and inter-theater lift to support the Marine littoral regiments and their expeditionary amphibious bases that'll pop up around the globe, around the first island chain and beyond, to provide fires in support of the fleet in terms of sea denial and sea control. I also mentioned about 60 large surface combatants, 50 smaller surface combatants, and then about 150 unmanned. So that was the breakdown of that. I heard somebody ask the Secretary a question about small surface combatants. So that'd be frigates and littoral combat ships. And I'll pause there.
One more, Jim?
Of course. We've got at least 5 more Okay, sir.
Admiral Gilday, it's Harry Kelso. I'm rather familiar with your role because one of my relatives served in the position you're in right now, Admiral Frank Kelso. My question, sir, is the Navy experiencing any challenges or difficulties with the firefighting foam, IEEE, because of the PFAS chemicals?
I just don't have enough specifics on that to speak to it. I'm not trying to be evasive. That one's just out of my competency jar, if you will, at the moment, sir. I'm happy to get back to you one-on-one about that to better answer the question, but I just don't have the specifics at this time. I apologize.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, sir. Just shout out. Oh, no, we can't.
I'm too damn old to be run. It scares the troops when people run.
Sir, it's Jerry Hendrickson. I've got a question. Lieutenant General Thurgood was this morning talking about the importance of the Army hitting IOC by September 30th of 2023. How is the Navy doing on IOC of CPS onto the Zumwalt class? I believe our target date was 2025. Are we on track to integrate CPS in the surface fleet?
Yeah, still on track for 2025 with respect to Zumwalt. We're watching that very closely. I will say that, and we're trying to keep the funding in place to support that as well. As you know, with respect to the weapon, we're hand in glove with the Army, so it's going to be the same weapon. Right now, it's shared in the testing phase, and then they're going to own it when we go into production. I was just down in Huntsville, Alabama, about a month and a half ago, walking through some of the testing and assembly of those weapons. And I would tell you, with respect to that program, I'm pretty impressed with where we started out from and where we are right now. Moving on pace, I think, remaining on glide slope and meeting every milestone that's been in place for that program. So very bullish on hypersonics, critical for Zumwalt in order to give that hull a viable mission and put her out in the Pacific where she belongs with those weapons.
One more. One more over there. Okay.
Hi, Admiral. This is Megan Eckstein with Defense News. I'm not sure if you heard the Secretary's remarks on the cruiser program, but kind of couching it as a safety issue rather than just a financial issue. The Vela Gulf example obviously is one that made a lot of news, but I wonder if there's any other color you can provide to us on how you're looking at the cruiser fleet and what it means to those sailors and kind of why maybe these are not appropriate platforms for them to continue to operate on.
I'm looking at cruisers through the same lens I look at everything else. And so the bottom line is we need to deliver the most, as I said up front, thing one is delivering the most lethal capable and lethal capable ready Navy that we can with the money we get. When I take a look at cruisers, I'll give you 3 areas of concern. The first is sustainability. And so with respect to those cruiser mods on ships that are now on average they are beyond their service life. They're approaching 35 years almost on average. And so we are paying tens of millions of dollars beyond what we expected to because of growth work and new work on ships that are beyond their service life. If we want to talk about delay days out of shipyards, when I took over the job, we had about 7,700 delay days out of private yards. Down now to between 2,700 and 3,000 delay days. Of those delay days, 1,200 belong to 4 ships. 3 of those ships are cruisers. They're eating us alive in terms of our ability to get maintenance back on track, which is where we need to be, as you know, to keep ships out on point. If we want to talk about reliability, we had to pull one cruiser in for voyage repairs during deployment. That cruiser was taking water below the waterline into a berthing compartment. A second cruiser we had to pull in for voyage repairs because she was taking water below the water line into a engineering into a main engine room. I had another cruiser that we had to bring back into its home port after it left for deployment, not once but twice because of leaking fuel tanks. So there's a reliability issue there. And then lastly, with respect to lethality, you have to see the threat to knock it down. And so Spy 1A, Spy 1B, Spy 1A, Spy 1B radars, they're just not sufficient given the threat that we're facing. So I go back to my responsibilities to keep it real and get better. Cruisers just aren't playing. I need to take that money and I need to reinvest it in more lethality. I explain to you what we're bringing to the fight across 3 dimensions. So just don't think of the fight in terms of cruisers, and specifically in terms of 7 cruisers. The fight's bigger than that. It's multidimensional. I mentioned distributed maritime operations and how we expect to come into the adversary. So we're really getting hung up on cruisers that we need to move away from. The other thing I want to talk about really quickly is the whole notion of how we divest to invest is being, in some cases, mischaracterized. So those cruisers are an example of divestment. And the way it's been explained or mischaracterized is people see those cruisers going away and they automatically say that the Navy ought to generate ships automatically. Not so. Why? Because I go back to the fact that we are not going to have a Navy we can't sustain, right? And the second thing is that money that we get back is being reinvested into readiness, modernization, and capacity in that order. If we don't, if capacity becomes king again in a static budget environment, we're going to go back to where we were in 2013, and we're going to pay for that capacity with manpower at sea, with weapons and magazines, and with respect to readiness and maintenance. And so I just won't go back. I just won't go back there. Thanks for letting me close that out with a fairly long answer.
Hey, sir, thank you so much for your time today.